What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher. Welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the nighttime sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks. And of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest to talk about their specialty in the field of astronomy. Before we get started, it is the last episode of August 2024. So we do have a special guest on today. Our buddy Richard Wright is here. I'll bring him on in a minute. A couple little announcements. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on the channel, you know, the typical YouTube stuff. You can also head over to Skywatcher. Let me see. Is it? Here we go. There we go. You can head over to skywatcher.threadless.com if you want to pick up some other cool swag to support the channel. And then you can also head over to skywatcherusa.com to see what's going on, what stuff's on sale. Our Dob August Nights promotion, I believe, is about to end. I think today is the last day. For those of you who have wave mounts on order, the first shipment has arrived here in the United States. It's currently with our QC team in California. So you will probably start to see wave mounts popping up in the public eye over the next couple weeks once the shipments start going out to dealers and everyone who's pre-ordered. The first shipment is a bit small, but there are several more shipments coming, especially before the end of the year. So if you don't get one immediately because you're on a pre-order, don't worry. There are more on the way, but the first shipment has arrived, so you won't be waiting much longer. If you want to check out some other cool clearance stuff, we've got all kinds of stuff on clearance, as well as this new package that we put together. This is the EQM35 Evolux 82 doublet APO kit. And it comes with the reducer. It's all paired as a little system, and you can get that on our website while supplies last if you want to go ahead and check that out. And then finally, we have the Virtuoso GTI 127. Actually, Richard, who's about to come on, has one of these, and other dealers have been getting them too. And they've been rather popular, especially if you like the moon and getting out and observe it. And it's a nice little combo there. So anyway, that's just some of the announcements today. Lastly, really quick, if you are getting a wave mount, they are constantly updating the firmware as they do with every other mount, but the wave mounts are a high priority right now. So if you are getting a wave mount, you can go over to support, firmware and software, and then right at the top we have the motor controller, the new loader, which works on all of our stuff, but you will need this loader, 1.84, and the absolute latest release of the wave mount firmware, because like I said, they're constantly advancing that. So over the next couple months, if you are a early adopter to the wave mounts, it probably isn't a bad idea just to keep an eye out on our support page, because new firmware is always going to be released as they put new features in and stuff like that. So keep an eye on that as well. And we will also be getting the manuals for wave mounts up, because the wave mounts are not shipping with manuals, paper manuals, because we're trying to save, you know, conserving paper and stuff like that, and not have so much waste. So going green, because that's our color. But you can head over there, and the manuals will be up. You can check all that out as well. So anyway, let me get that out of the way. And without further ado, I'm going to pop over to Richard. Let me switch. Hey, Richard, how's it going?
Hey, Kevin. Great. Nice.
Hi,
Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Well, there we go. That's better. Hopefully everyone can hear everybody. Our audio should be good. But for those of you who have watched the webcast in the past, we have had Richard on multiple times to talk about multiple topics. He's a good friend of ours. And today we're going to be talking probably all things astronomy. Richard is an accomplished writer, reviewer, astrophotographer, speaker. The list goes on and on and on what Richard does. So good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Kevin.
I'm not gonna, Richard's joining us from Florida. I'm in Arizona, so we're going cross country here. Usually how I do these episodes is we ask how someone gets started in astronomy. Richard's been on enough to where I don't think we're going to use that as the preliminary start point, because if you want to know, you can go back and actually watch past episodes with Richard. So We'll just jump right in because there's a lot of new stuff. Richard joined us. Well, he was actually at on Starfest with us about a month ago at this point. It was a
Hmm.
first for both of us. Richard, what did you think of Starfest?
Uh, I was very impressed. It's kind of been on my radar for a while. I had some trouble getting in and out of Canada with, a whole bunch of Astro gear once, and so it's like it kind of burned me out on Canada. But uh, if I had known, it would have been worth the trouble. It's simply the largest star party I think I'd ever attended. It's also one of the best organized star parties. The location, I mean, it's not as dark as your favorite, the Grand Canyon, but it's darker than my favorite, the Winter Star Party. So it's pretty dark. You can see the Milky Way, and there were tons of people there, and several vendors there, and it was kind of, weather was come and go, but we got some lucky breaks. We had at least 2 nights. I was there with the simulation curriculum guys slash Sky Safari and Pegasus Astro, and we're kind of showing off our Sky Eye thing, and we got more time under Sky to play with that than we thought we were looking at the forecast. So I was very impressed, and I think I will be back. Yep, I will definitely try to be getting back.
I know we're gonna try to make it an annual event for us.
Hmm.
It just depends how the schedule works out because sometimes events get a little complicated as far as scheduling goes. But I know it's something that we've been looking to actively put in rotation. We don't have a lot at the moment that goes on around August, but it's a good time to get out and go do stuff. I did get to see, for those of you who are watching, we did talk about it, I think, last week in the Starfest episode, was we got to actually try the Smart Eye that you've been working on with simulation curriculum. There it is, the prototype. Now, some people probably have read about that from NEAF, but for those who don't really know what it is, could you kind of explain what Smart Eye is? And
So we have smart telescopes now, and we have smart cameras now, and Smart Eye is a smart eyepiece. So you put it in the telescope you already have. It's it's a IMX 533 sensor, so and a computer and a high resolution display, and it's got a little diopter so you can focus on it. It's like looking in an eyepiece. We're not trying to make it a imaging device necessarily. It's not the same experience that you get, with a C Star or an Origin, except it's in an eyepiece. It's actually modeled around the eyepiece experience. It's just enhanced because, of course, we have a camera, so we can integrate lots and lots of light. For the other nerds in the crowd besides myself, yes, it's live stacking, but it's live stacking with some secret sauce. So we're hoping that that it'll be successful and that a lot of people will like it. It won't be for everybody. And I came from visual roots and went imaging and was an imaging snob for a while. And I've sort of finally found my place in between. There are some things that look better in an eyepiece than what the camera and the computer display can do. So I'm not trying to replace eyepieces, but I think that it has a place in your eyepiece collection. Imagers may not like it because they just want to image and do better things. And there's going to be, anyway, that's what it is. So it's an enhanced visual experience is what we're trying to build with that.
someone's asking if you can use it during daylight.
Yes. I don't know that that's going to be a huge marketing checkbox, but birding or looking at something far away. So in auto exposure mode, um, looking at the moon, looking at the sun with a proper solar filter, of course. It is not a solar eyepiece. But if you have a white light filter or a Herschel wedge, it'll work with that. So it'll have like an auto exposure, so it knows it's really bright, and it'll do really short exposures, and it won't integrate either. I mean, if it's really bright, you don't need to do any integration. But yeah, you can use it for wildlife spotting, and I guess the advantage of that, is you can grab the image, with your phone or something, and say, oh, I got this bird or this house or that sort of thing through my telescope. So
I
yeah.
know it's something that we'll probably end up doing a like dedicated episode on once they're actually out in the wild. And talking to the Pegasus Astro team at Starfest, they had mentioned that it'll probably be the first part of next year
Hmm.
before like a production run. I think they mentioned there would be a little run for like reviews and beta test
Yeah,
by the end of the year,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the production stuff should be probably early next year.
We're going to do a small run at the end of the year, and then ship it out to not beta testers. Really, it's not like we want to ship it to influencers early so that they can talk about it on YouTube. We want to send it to people who are good problem solvers and people who have good feedback on it. We just want to iterate on it at least once with a wider range, with a wider audience than ourselves about the visual experience and everything. And then once we've got an iteration, and then we'll make a whole bunch of them, and they'll be available in volume first quarter next year at NEAF. We'll have them. They should be all over the place at NEAF. I keep suggesting, I don't know if it'll happen, but it's like, we should set up outside the hotel at night or something and let people come in and look. But yeah, first quarter next year, we should be in volume. And so far, it's getting close to the end of the year, but so far, we're on track, for that. We haven't run into any big showstoppers to get
Yeah,
in
I
the
got
way.
to use it at Star. I didn't get to play like fully with it, but I got to look at
Mm-hmm.
it and throw some targets over to them. And we had it on a Takahashi FSQ 85. Um, as someone who does visual all the time, I've got the night vision stuff, so I know what that's like. For anybody who's kind of interested in them, this device is a bit of a different experience. I don't really know how to explain it. It's very unique. I mean, it's live imaging, so you're not getting
Mm-hmm.
kind of that visual feel to it. You can definitely tell you're looking at a screen, but as someone who does outreach, and if you're doing outreach, this is a tremendous tool to have in the toolbox for an outreach enthusiast because it's a serious sensor. It's a 533, so you've got really clean data coming in, and it gives that visual like experience. Richard and I have done live imaging at events before, and there's like a disconnect when people actually come at an event and they walk up and they see a telescope and they're like, well, where do we look? It's like, oh, well, we're doing live imaging tonight because that's what was requested. And they kind of glaze over and they think it's interesting for a minute and then they walk away. So something like this makes that live imaging possible. It really simplifies it. Like you're not dragging out a laptop and a monitor and cables and all this extra crap.
Mm-hmm.
It's one battery, one USB, and this. And then you get to walk up and it still feels like you're looking through an eyepiece, but you're just looking at a screen. So I like it because it shrinks that live imaging setup that's normally so complicated and a headache to deal with into this tiny little eyepiece kind of device. But like Richard said, it's probably not going to be for everyone, but if you're an outreach enthusiast and you have a tracking telescope, something like this is really impressive to have in the toolbox. So,
Or,
but
part of what motivated the genesis of this too is if you have family members who just don't get it. Like, I mean, there's a lot of us have that, right? We're, oh wow, this is light from a galaxy and it's interacting with my brain, and oh, that's great. And then, your spouse or a child or somebody looks through it and they're like, as my wife says, it looks like snot on the eyepiece. Not impressed at all.
thanks,
You
Diane.
can pop this in, and they will be impressed because it looks like a galaxy. Like, and you don't have to wait 10 minutes. It looks like a galaxy right away. And so, yeah, well, we'll see what happens next year.
Do you think it'll work in Altaz? There's a question.
Yes, yes. In fact, that was almost a non-negotiable. It has to work with an Altaz mount. um, I've been doing 10-second exposures on an Altaz mount. So it's aligning the images, and that includes image rotation. So yes, you get field rotation, but only if you expose long enough. And at a moderate focal length, around 600 millimeters or so, you don't get enough field rotation in a 10-second exposure to ruin that exposure. And so over a period of time, the exposures are getting rotated as they're being combined with the previous exposures. Depending on your focal length, you may be able to go longer too than 10 seconds. That's just going to be the default. And there's a little dial on it. You'll be able to, change a lot of the settings for that. But I have lots of test data, because we've been working on this for 2.5 years. Lots of test data acquired with, with that sensor, taken on alt as mounts to make sure that it works and produces, what we need. So yes, alt as. The one thing we wish we could do is it has to be a tracking mount, a push mount. It's just you just within a second or two the stars are moving, and we just can't do it on a push to mount. It's got to be a tracking, but an alt-as tracking, Kevin's big Dob at the Grand Canyon. Oh, I can't wait to try it.
Or any of our go-to Dobs would be a good fit because they're also fast.
Mm-hmm.
There's does it help steadying the image?
What do you mean by steady? I don't know what you mean by steadying the image, but we can't defeat seeing. But if you mean like vibrations, yes. It can sort of tell if there's a bad frame, and it's going to have an accelerometer in it. We can tell when you're banging on it. So when you push the button, we can tell when to stop moving around before we start doing images. So,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
We'll have to do a whole episode on it once it's out. That way we're not spending a whole hour on it. It definitely deserves its own episode because it's a very cool, unique thing. But what I like about it in comparison to the smart scope mentality is so many of us have good equipment and good telescopes laying around already to where maybe you're not in a position to where you need a smart telescope. This is great for those of us who already have established systems, and you just pop it in there and you get that live imaging capability. And I'm sure you guys will advance it further as time goes on with all kinds of nifty little features to do.
We have ideas to keep us busy for years after the first release.
Does the auto exposure help with like full moon and bright moon viewing?
Yes, you'll be able to look at the moon with it.
So
I prefer the moon through a real eyepiece, to tell the truth too.
There's enough light there. You don't need a camera on it, but if you really want to,
there's a just like as an imager, going back to visual, there's a dynamic range. There's a brightness. There's a difference in brightness that you get when you're viewing the moon visually. Same thing on the sun. Same thing like with globular clusters. Even that change in brightness that you see visually, the camera could sort of capture that, but computer displays can't. And I won't get into the technical area, but you can't reproduce that on a display right now. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, but right now nothing can match that visual. That I just love looking at the moon. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah. Someone was asking what the cost is. Last I talked, I don't know that the cost has been 100% pinned, but they were saying roughly about $1,500, I think, at the Star Park.
Not officially pinned yet. There will be introductory pricing and then final pricing. So
yeah, I think $1,500 is pretty for what you're actually getting when you consider how much like a 533 camera on its own costs.
Yeah,
they're about $1,000. So
yeah, it's a real 533 camera. It's going to be cooled, so it's a that alone will cost you close to $1,000, and then the display is pretty expensive too.
It'll be pretty neat, but yeah, stay tuned, guys. We'll do a dedicated episode for one of those once they're out and about, and have Richard back on and actually go into full detail into it. So, another thing that we had at Starfest for Skywatcher, and Richard, you actually have them in your possession now, are the wave mounts. I was curious just from your findings. It's a very hot topic because the first shipment has finally arrived and people are itching to get them. But as someone who's not inside the Skywatcher bubble, and I know you're doing work with them, so I don't want to like core out any of that too early. But as someone who's never used them up until this point, what are your initial thoughts for anybody who's got one on order?
I think they're going to be happy with them. I have not done any, I just got it too. I mean, I did get an early one, but I just got it. And it's the rainy season in Florida, so I haven't had it outside a lot. It's it's really they're really nice. I have the Star Adventure GTI, and I really like having a small, tiny mount that works like a real mount, but it's lightweight and it jiggles, right? It's just not it's just not solid. The old Paramount guy, right? I'm not getting the Paramount experience with a Star Adventure GTI. But with the Wave mount, it's small, but it's very solid. It's like, oh, this feels like a real mount. And when it doesn't jiggle, yeah, so to speak. And I've used it out as and equatorial, mostly solar observing so far. We got our first clear night last night, and I was doing some visual with it. Um, yeah, they're so far pretty good. I've not done my in-depth analysis of it yet, but they're very fast to set up. I mean, they've got a homing sensor, one of my favorite features. Um, with the Paramounts, they had homing sensors, and you could do a polar alignment, in the day by homing it and then slewing to the sun, and then adjust the mount so that the sun is centered. And when you do that, you've got these vectors pointing around. You're moving that system, and when you do that, uh, you're pretty close to polar aligned. So
Yeah, with my Mighty that I've had over the years, I've done Richard's method, and it works really well. Even the EQ8R, because it has homing sensors, does the same thing.
mm-hmm.
So um, I had the Wave 150 sample that I have out at an event Wednesday night, and it was the first time I've taken one out to the field for just visual stuff, and it was using a 4-inch refractor. And man, I'm not trying to toot our own horn, but just the ability of a strain wave, it's really nice to be like, I just want to go out and I want to do viewing, or I want to do a little bit of imaging, and a lot like this is a test system we're working with, and that's just an EvoStar 80, but that whole thing weighs like 20 pounds and it's all ready to go. I just pick it up, pop it outside, go through the alignment routine on the ASI Air for this setup, and you're off to the races. It makes getting out and doing the hobby that you love easier than ever because of how convenient it actually is. So that's what I like about them. So if you're
Yeah.
coming out to outreach events, you will probably start to see a wave mount or two in the future because they make convenience so nice. A hot topic that actually came up at Starfest, and we're not doing like a behind the backtracking to Starfest. It's just that's the last time Richard and I hung out in person. But there was a big conversation. I was actually pulled into the panel, but Richard was there, and I think it'd be cool to talk about it here because Richard has a unique perspective on it. Is AI processing. We're seeing a lot of this blur exterminator. You see a lot of these really cost-effective refractors and telescopes coming out where maybe the optics are not as high-end as in the past for competing companies. But being that you are someone who engineers software, you write code, and you're an imager, what are your thoughts on a lot of people using like Blur Exterminator now and these AI processing tools for the future?
So I have to qualify it by saying there's two kinds of AI. There's generative AI, which is really bad, I think, for photography, for true photography, and for astrophotographers. It's great for making images. If I want to make a picture of, my favorite political opponent, posing in front of the devil, or if I want to, those sorts of things, that's called generative AI. And there are some noise packages. Topaz Noise is one of them that brings in some elements of generative AI, and it will synthesize things for you in order to give you a more pleasing image. There was a big brouhaha about Samsung's phones a while back. They would take a picture of the moon, and it would actually go out and get a moon image and match it up with yours, and then it would fill in the details from somebody else's moon image. That's called generative AI, and That's not true photography. It might be imaging. Depends on how you split that hair as to, well, I created this image of the moon. That's fine, but I don't think you should call it photography. Um, Other types of AI are simply automating tasks that a human being would do. It doesn't create anything new. It's just performing the same tasks you would do, but it's doing it intelligently using patterns that it's seen in a training set. So you would train a person to do, you would go to a workshop and learn how to use PixInsight, and you would learn how to use the noise tools in PixInsight, and and if you're, spend enough time on it and you're reasonably intelligent, you'll get really fast and good at using PixInsight to use all those tools. And Russ Kroman's tools in particular are that type of AI. I don't mind using Blur Exterminator or because it's doing the same thing I did before. It just does it faster. Now you could learn to use the tool and you can overuse it. You drag the slider way too far and you get really weird looking results. Same thing happens with the AI tools. You can drag the slider too far and the AI tool will create something that doesn't look very good. But Russ Kroman's tools don't really do anything that you couldn't do for yourself in PixInsight if you were really, really, really good at the PixInsight tools. So all that's doing is making high-end astrophotography a lot more approachable. There's been some top imagers who don't like the deconvolution tool because they like their stars the way they do it. But the truth is, they're processing their stars too. They just are backing off at a certain point, and if you use the AI tool, it might go a little bit further. But it's really it doesn't really take away from, this is my image. It just sort of takes away from how good are you as an image processor to produce that image. So I don't have a problem with non-generative AI because it's just making things easier for you. It's like the ASI Air, right? You should have to set up a mount and you should have to plug the camera in and you should set 80 wires and you need to learn how to do cable management and you need to learn how to plug this in and you need to learn. I mean, you can take that approach. I remember when go-to telescopes were going to destroy the industry. That's how old I am, right? It's like they're going to destroy the industry. And it's the same thing. I don't think it's going to destroy the industry. It's just making it's just making astrophotography more accessible to more people. And people are always threatened by that, right? I've spent all this time doing the hard work and acquiring this skill, and all these young pups come along and they're making progress way too fast because they're cheating and they're taking all these shortcuts. Maybe, but no, I don't think so.
You also have to be willing to evolve as things evolve out there. So it's, yeah, I
yeah,
don't mind that. I think the major issue when it comes to the AI tools, particularly like Blur Exterminator, is like you said, it's with anything, if you use it too much, or as I said in the talk that had with Steve Malia, Ontario Telescope, during his panel, is my worry is so many people are going to end up using it as a crutch to where, oh, that looks great, and they don't advance themselves further than that. They're just like, oh, well, it just does this, so that means I don't have to push harder. I don't have to learn new things. I'm just going to do what this thing does. And it's kind of a lazier approach, but that's a personal choice for people. But my concern is, especially at Starfest, you see all these amazing imagers that are there with the astrophotography contest, and it's amazing work. And a lot of times I feel like I shouldn't be up talking about this stuff. One of them should be doing it because they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. And my worry as the AI tools advance further is it pushes people to learn less and less about their craft to where it's just more like, oh, press button and it looks like this, where it reduces the amount of experimentation people are willing to do. And who's going to be the next speaker? Who's going to be the next generation of, presenter at these events? And when are they going to teach us how what they do to make it better? So
I think the shift is going to be, I mean, astrophotography has been a very technical thing, and it's art. Photography is art. It's not supposed to be a technical thing. It used to take photos, and you would get your photography, you get your film developed, and a skilled technician would process your negatives to get a really good image. And the best photographers were artists. They would frame things up, they got the color right, they would do that. And the really good ones were also good at processing. And I think, you know, a lot of great astrophotographers are really good at technical things, but maybe not that great at art. And we're going to see where people who are really good at art, it's astrophotography is going to be more accessible to people who are really good at art. And it's going to shift from being mostly technical to mostly artistic, because of the tools. We see the same thing with photography. We still have photography. We still have fine art photography. We still have photographers who, stand out in their field and do really great work. Photoshop didn't destroy, the photography industry. One of the other things that came up at Starfest was, if we got all these tools, you don't need a good refractor anymore. You could buy a really crappy refractor and just fix it, yeah, with all these AI tools. But we've already seen this. We've already done this before. This is a rerun. We've had Photoshop for years, and we've had lens correction in Photoshop, and we've had sharpening tools in Photoshop, and there's still a very vibrant market for like L series lenses, right? People are dropping big bucks for high quality lenses because the people who are really good at it know that if you start with something better, it's easier to process and get an amazing image at the end than if you start with something that's not so great. And I think I could be wrong, but I think we're just going through some growing pains right now where suddenly a lot of people are able to produce things that are really good by our standards from 5 years ago. And it's scary. It's like, well, now everybody can do it. Everybody can do it really good. But I think what's going to happen is after this shakeout, people again are going to distinguish themselves by doing really interesting compositions and by trying new and different things that we hadn't thought of before, because now our hands aren't tied, um, by the technology. So every generation, we get used to things as they are and we get real imaginative. The old generation can't really imagine very much beyond what they've done because this already exceeds their wildest dreams. And that's how technology, moves forwards. There are occasionally people who can, resist that. I'm trying really hard to resist that myself. I'm getting into my later years, and it's an effort, not to go, well, once we get that, there's nothing left, right? So what are we going to do? There's always plenty. There's always plenty to do after the fact.
there was a comment early on about a presentation that you've done before, which is how auto guiding needs to die. Um, and
Yeah.
I think the conversation's really interesting because you have so many people now who are like, "Oh, strain waves are amazing," when it's like 5 years ago, if maybe a little bit longer than that, everyone wanted mounts that you didn't have to auto guide. The whole thing was, I don't want to have to auto guide. How long can I go without a guider? And now we have mounts that literally require auto guiding to be the best performance they can. Um,
Hmm.
what's your thought, and what are you seeing now as some for auto guiding and your thoughts?
Yeah. I'm still in that religion. Auto guiding needs to die, and it will. And strain wave mounts are just a temporary speed bump on that road. And maybe not. I worked with early strain wave mount. Actually, I should back up and kind of defend why does auto guiding need to die? This proves auto guiding needs. I'm right. All right. CMOS sensors have gotten so good. The top tier of the CMOS sensors, not all of them, but they've gotten so good at the dark noise and the read noise that you can get the same results from several short exposures than you could get from a single long exposure. Now there is always a drop off. You can't do a thousand 1 second exposures is not, or 3,600 1 second exposures is not going to give you the same signal to noise ratio as a single 5 minute exposure. But there is a medium point at which you don't need to expose any longer, and that number is getting smaller and smaller. It depends on the sensor that you're using, which is why we're using an expensive sensor in Smart Eye, because you can't do this with a cheap sensor. Our first prototype was with like a Raspberry Pi camera, and it was just no, it was awful. You had to expose forever to get anything. But it also depends on how bright the target is, and how fast your optic is. If you're shooting at f15 or something, or if you're shooting at f3. Um, but you can get short exposures, and integrate those, and you get just as good, you get the same result, signal noise rise, as if you'd taken one long exposure. Um, and like I said, it can't be 1 second exposures. It might have to be a minute exposures, or it might be 30-second exposures, or it might be 10-second exposures, depending on the target. And that that line just gets shorter and shorter every generation of CMOS sensors. And so I don't need, I mean, a long time ago, I don't need to do, I remember when I first got started, my mentors were like, you got to go like 10 or 15 minutes on an HA image, Richard. If you want hydrogen alpha, I mean, 10 or 15 minutes per exposure. And I started doing 5 minute exposures on the last generation of CCDs, and I started doing 2 minute exposures on the current CMOS. And actually, I've done 1 minute exposures on the current CMOS, and I'm getting I'm I, the can if the camera was completely perfect and had no noise, you could get away with 1 second exposures, but the cameras still have noise. So you got to go at least a little bit, depending on the signal. So, all right, then all I need is a couple of minutes, and I don't need to guide, because most mounts can go a couple of minutes. Well, then some Yahoo gets this great idea. Why don't we take this strainwave technology from industrial robotics and make telescope mounts with it? And the first strainwave mount that I did a review for, the periodic error was awful. I couldn't even do 10 seconds. I could not do 10-second exposure. I would get a good 10-second, and I'd get two bad 10 seconds, and then I'd get a good 10-second. Well, that's useless. You can't, that's not useful. I need to be able to do 10 seconds back to back to back, or better, 30 seconds or a minute back to back to back. Well, that was an early generation. I won't mention the names, to protect the guilty. I still have that strainwave mount. I'm probably going to donate it to the astronomy club. The newer strainwave mounts have much better periodic error. I've yet to characterize the Wave 150, but I know ZWO is much better. And Pegasus Astro has a strainwave mount out, and we were at Starfest, and Evans told me, people were doing 1 and 2 minutes because they have a very long period. So they still move, but they move slow enough that you can take a single, the single exposure can be longer without guiding. So the strainwave mounts are getting better in terms of periodic error, and the CMOS sensors are getting better, and they'll catch up again. Either the periodic error gets slow enough, short enough on the strain waves that you'll be able to do as long as you need to, or the CMOS sensors, the next generation of CMOS sensors, will be another giant step forward in terms of read and dark pattern noise, and how short you can go. So yeah, guiding will die. Um, and listen, if a mount can go a couple of minutes or even a minute unguided, and you're doing 15-second exposures, guess what? Your 15-second exposures are your guider exposures. Um, uh, People will bring up when I talk about this, well, that's thousands of images, it's lots of megabytes. Well, there's ways around that, and computers and storage is getting better. So there's more than one way to fix that as a software engineer. More than one way to fix that. I guarantee you, I am not every frame stacking 300 images with a Sigma reject. There are cleverer ways to do that, and yeah, and I think that problem is going to go away as well. So
Um,
yeah, I still
there's
think
a
guiding is going to die eventually.
there is a question here. Is the difference between long and short exposures non-existent or negligible?
Um, Both. It depends on how long the exposure is. So I did an experiment where I did 5 minute exposure. I did 5 minutes worth of 1 second exposures. When I mean, like I said, we've been working on this eyepiece for 2.5 years, and so I did a lot of proof of concept uh, things. 5 minutes worth of 1 second exposures, and then 5 minutes worth of 2 second exposures, and 5 minutes worth of 3 second exposures. And I kept ramping up until I had one single 5 minute exposure. I used a Paramount. Okay, I could do 5 minutes. Um, and all right, where's the drop off? And the drop off, depending on the target, was anywhere between 10 seconds, and this is for color, by the way, not narrowband, but for this particular sensor was between 10 seconds and 3 or 4 seconds. uh 3 or 4 second images stacked up versus a 5 minute exposure had the same signal to noise ratio. So it could be very, very small. It was a bright target. So you're not going to get that on everything. But I mean, if you're shooting M42, it's like when everybody talks about, oh, look how short you can go. They always do M42 and Andromeda, like the two brightest things in the sky, right? But try that on the Crescent Nebula, or some dimmer targets. You will need to go more than 3 seconds, to do that. But um, a minute might be enough, and it depends on your sensor. I think the top three sensors, the 533, the 571, and the 455, which are like also the top three most expensive sensors. But those right now have like the lowest noise profiles for doing short exposures. And if you have a 455, you don't want to do 20-second exposures anyway, because those images are gigantic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's duty cycle, right? So you take an exposure and then you got to download it, and then you got to take another exposure and download it, and you got a huge disk full of files. And the traditional way of processing data, these images, is going to be very tedious. But try, I would say try. You've been guiding and doing 5 minute exposures, yeah, probably, depending on your scope and your camera. Try 1 minute exposures one night, see what happens. You might be
Mm-hmm.
surprised. You still need the same amount of time, which is really important to point out. You can, if you need 3 hours to get a good signal to noise ratio, you need 3 hours. It doesn't matter whether it's 3 hours worth of 10-minute exposures or 3 hours worth of really short exposures. You still need that much light from the object to get the signal noise ratio that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Does
a
Richard
little more about
guide
that.
on some of his deep sky picks?
Yes, yes, I do. I used to not, when I was at Software Bisque, as part of the shtick, right? Because we could go really long on a Paramount unguided, and so that was like my thing. Unguided, and unguided it's still very convenient. And when I'm running with a Paramount and I can go 5 or 10 minutes unguided, it's luxurious, because you don't have so many images to process after the fact. But I normally will go, if I'm not on a Paramount, I'll just see how long I can go, and usually that's fast enough. But oftentimes I will guide too. Um, Not oftentimes, but I will guide too. Usually the Star Adventure GTI, I need to guide. The wave mounts, I suspect I'm going to need to guide. Unnamed other strain wave mounts that I've used in the past had to guide. And it's still nice until the software catches up. To not have 700 images on your laptop to
Yeah.
stack.
You need a
So if
really
yeah,
powerful processing machine. So.
right. Guiding needs to die. I'll say that for a long time, but I'm not going to say yet guiding is dead. It still has its place. Um, but I think it is going to die. Within my
Well, the
career,
sensors are getting
certainly.
so clean now that you're able to shoot
Mm-hmm.
shorter stuff and get better results. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, what's your favorite astronomy book and personality?
Oh my favorite astronomy book and personality. Wow, that's hard. I don't know. There's a lot of personalities that I like. They're all friends. I don't want to. Kevin Lagore is my favorite astronomy personality. Did I say that? No. I mean, I've not met many people in this industry that I don't like. Um, they're all, most all of them are very, very nice people. And my favorite astronomy book. Um, can I say Carl Sagan? Does that count? I like Carl Sagan. I love Carl Sagan. I've read several of his books. Demon Haunted World is really good. It's not really an astronomy book, it's more about science. I'm reading a book right now called Still as Bright. It's about the moon. I love it. I love
Hmm.
it. Really good, really good book. Um, Garfunkel's Lunar Cognita, 3 volume set on the moon, is also really good. You might see a pattern uh, in
Richard's
other
really into the
books.
moon, by the way, if you haven't figured it out.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I really like. Yeah, I really like the moon. Yeah, sorry, on the spot, I can't. I feel like a deer in the
no,
headlights. I don't
that's
know.
a hard
I
one.
don't know.
Carl
I mean, I
Sagan's
could
hard.
recommend. I
Hard.
always recommend, the Backyard Guide. Terrence. Those books are good starter books. But yeah,
No, it's a there's so many things out there. I mean, if I had to pick someone who was like on a professional level, I really like Brian Cox, even though he's a physicist.
oh yeah, oh
He's
yeah.
really, I
He's
like the way he approaches very complex astronomical, astrophysics stuff, but he's
yeah,
a really good way of
yeah,
doing it. So,
yeah. Oh, definitely, Brian. Uh, I mean, a lot of people would pick Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye, but Brian Cox definitely is, I think, a
I
top
just
tier
kind of like
man.
that he stays on topic and it doesn't become like you know, you're chasing down and bashing some approach of something. That's what I like about Brian Cox a lot. Is he, at least from what I've seen, he tends to be very polished, on point about what
Well,
we're talking about.
there's a thin line between science educator and popularizer and celebrity.
Yep. Yes.
I'll leave that there on the table, and you can make of that what you want.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
What inspires you most about astronomy and astronomers? I guess so.
What inspires me most? I mean, I guess from my childhood, I've been you know an fascinated by the night sky and the moon. I used to lay in the yard and look at the moon, and I'm old enough to where I remember looking at the moon when there were astronauts walking on the moon. Um, and so that, I guess, got me started. The thing about, a weird thing that my family doesn't understand, a lot of my family, is when you realize how big the universe is, it makes a lot of people feel very small and insignificant. And it has exactly the opposite effect on me. Um, the fact it's like you know everybody plays the lottery and somebody wins the lottery. Imagine how they feel. I won the lottery. Not just that I have all this money, but I am so lucky. I am the one in a billion trillion trillion who won this lottery. And maybe that's how I feel, because it's not that I feel small and insignificant on this tiny speck of dust. It's like, wow, I actually have some comprehension of how big and how vast and how amazing the universe is. And that actually makes me feel very important. It makes me feel very rare. And very special. It's like there's nobody on Mars that knows what Mars is. There's nobody in the rest of the solar system off of the planet Earth that we know of, going, hey, this is really cool. And I understand, radiation and why the sun works and, the solar wind and, or how old the universe is or how big the universe is. And so knowing that, and the more I learn about that, the more special and privileged I feel about that. And it makes me feel big and huge, even though I'm a small, insignificant ant on this rock going around the sun. I have this
Mm-hmm.
perspective that you know, that is most likely very, very rare in the universe, very, very precious. You know, the most precious rare thing in all the universe is probably us or other creatures like us. um, and there may not be very many of us
Yeah.
out there. And so that does not make me feel like life is pointless. It makes me feel like this is so much more valuable than you possibly can get your arms around at times.
Yeah. There's we're 9 minutes left. I've got two interesting questions. The first one: can the Smart Eye stack for planetary imaging?
Not right now.
Yeah, a 533 is a big chip for planetary, and that's a lot of data that's got to go quick. So
Well, you can do a region of interest, and I've seen some. When you say stacking, I'm thinking like auto stacker and things like that. That's pretty. That's a lot to ask of the little computer that's in
yeah,
that device. But it's on the radar, for eventually, because yeah, eventually we're going to want to be able to do that.
stay tuned.
Yeah, for sure.
um, can you speak more on the future of software processing?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think AI is certainly important. Um, it's not the end all beat all. I've always been touting, like my day job and my specialty is GPU technologies, which is parallel processing, which is, in layman's term, it's like if you had to paint a fence and you had two people, they could paint the fence twice as fast. And if you had 10 people, you could paint the fence 10 times as fast. That's what parallel processing is. And the computer has multiple people who can paint your fences, simultaneously. And the CPU has 8 or 10 people who can paint your fence, but the hardware that makes graphics and games work on your laptop has thousands of people who can paint your fence. And so applying that to computer graphics is going to dramatically speed up image processing. I think um, the frontier that I'm really the most looking forward to is like planetary, lunar imaging, the lucky imaging, auto stacker and tools like that. They take so long to go through all those images and do all the processing that they have to do. And somebody someday, whether it's me or somebody else, is going to figure out to put that on the GPU instead of the CPU, and it's going to run a lot faster. And so I'm very excited about that day coming. Perhaps it can even do it real time on an eyepiece and a telescope. We'll see when we get to that day. Um, but I think the AI, as far as automating what people do and learning from examples of what people do, that's going to keep getting better and faster and easier. And then the tools to put together tools, so to speak, it'll just create there's going to be a landslide of that. But it's again, I just want to emphasize it's not going to get away with the artistry of photography. I don't think it's going to diminish that at all. There are lots and lots of photos of lions on the internet, but I still like to go to the zoo and see the lion and take a picture myself of the lion and crop it the way I want to crop it, and think, make my little tweaks and make that my own. Um, I don't think that's ever going to go away. The desire to do something yourself, even if
mm-hmm.
it gets easier, it's going to attract a lot more people. I think the same number of people are going to want to get extreme with it, and they're going to push the boundaries. It's just instead of that core people being 80% of the people who are doing it really hardcore, it'll be 3% who are doing it really hardcore. It's the same number of people, but now the pond is so much bigger, and
Yeah.
there's so many more people practicing it. And that's only going to work out good for us because it's going to drive prices down because things can be made mass product, more people. How can it be a bad thing for more people to care about light pollution, or discover that there are galaxies over their head that they can get from their backyard with their C star or their dwarf, or whatnot. So I'm excited about that. I think it's time for astrophotography to become a mainstream commodity practice instead of a niche that only the baby boomers who like to tinker and things, can do. It's time to break those walls down and let everybody do astrophotography. And those of us who did it the hard way, myself included, we're just going to have to get used to the fact that people are going to get started and they're going to make progress a lot faster than we did. And that's fine. That's okay. Welcome, welcome aboard.
Well, and I think COVID was a really good example of, that's the next generation of surge that we have into the hobby. So many people, I know you get it when you do a talk and, I got into it from the Apollo missions, and that there's a large group of people that have the inspiration took hold when that happened. And it seems like the next major surge was COVID, where it's like, oh, well, I was stuck at home. I couldn't be around people.
I need a hobby. What am I going to do?
I need something to do. And it exploded. And I don't think anybody at the beginning of COVID in our industry really thought we'd have a job in like 4 months when COVID hit. And it turned out to be the complete opposite. But now you have all these newcomers. I mean, even going to like the star parties now, you see so many people who, I got started 2 years ago, or I got started a year ago, and they have these little systems that they're running and they're doing some good work. I think that was the surge that maybe we needed. But now you have things like C-Star, for example. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, this is garbage and blah, 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 blah. Then you're not the target audience. But at outreach events now, we have so many, you always get people who are like, well, what's a good starter telescope? And for a long time, it was always like, get yourself like a little, Celestron 4SE or a 6SE or whatever like that. Now, a lot of the recommendations end up shipping over to like a C-Star. And as someone who works in a competing company against them, there's this delicate balance of like, I don't want to support a competing company, but then there's the actual education side, outreach enthusiast. You're there to just spread the word of astronomy and stuff like that. It's like, it's getting a new person into the hobby and they're being successful at it out of the gate to where it's going to keep them engaged in the hobby. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want? Honestly, is the goal is to spread, like you said, there's more people who are aware of how light pollution is affecting things, and we're not having dark skies anymore. And by more people getting telescopes and getting involved with it, they're realizing that, hey, maybe we need to do something more about it. So, but, for those asking when the Smart Eye eyepiece is coming out, probably after the new year is when that's going to come out. We'll probably have Richard back on and talk about it in depth, specifically focused on that when it's actually out in the world and ready to go. So, but all right, everyone. Well, that's pretty much it. We blew through our hour. Thanks, Richard, for hanging out with us this morning and talking tech and all kinds of fun stuff.
Had fun.
Next week, guys, it is the beginning of September. So we're, of course, going to be on with our What's Up for the Month topic. So join us next week. We'll have our new totem target that'll be going live probably tomorrow for you to see that. We do need to get back in and ship some totem patches. We're a little late on that, but it's been a really busy month between going to Starfest and launching the wave mounts and stuff like that. So there's a lot going on. So please be patient, but we'll get those patches out as soon as possible. But other than that, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with us this morning. And of course, we will see you guys next week on the What's Up Webcast. And of course, Richard, thanks for being on. So.
You're welcome. Had fun.
And for those of you who are interested in Smart Eye, just keep an eye on probably the Pegasus Astro website. They have all the details over there. And then we'll have Richard back on when it's a real thing. And we'll get a better idea of it. Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, smarteyepiece.com.
Oh, well, there you go. All the specs that you might want to know will be up there. So, all right, everyone. Thank you very much. Clear skies. Have a great week. It's a 3-day weekend if you're here in the U.S. for most of us. So have a safe 3-day weekend, and we will see you guys next Friday. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.